Hi, I'm Josh and welcome to Josh's Bookish Voyage. In this video, I'm going to be talking about my top 10 episodes of Buffy the Vampire Slayer and giving book recommendations for each one. I love Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I'm pretty sure there's already a Buffy book tag out there, but before I do it, I wanted to try something different, and I thought this would be a fun, different way of talking about Buffy. I will say that I think my initial idea came from Gabby Reed's giving a book recommendation for every song on a Taylor Swift album. So let's just start. I should be clear. These are my favorite episodes, and I've ordered them from number 10 to 1. Of course, this isn't a definitive answer. I'm going to be talking about these episodes of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, so there will be spoilers for Buffy. There won't be spoilers for the books themselves, unless of course you consider the overarching theme a spoiler. But just keep that in mind. I mean, Buffy is over 2 decades old now, so I imagine, or is it 3 decades? How old is Buffy? The point is that if you don't want to be spoiled for Buffy, then maybe you don't want to watch this. The first episode is going to be Fear Itself, Season 4, Episode 4. Now, personally, and I think generally, people accept that Season 4 is probably the worst season of Buffy, and I don't disagree. But this episode always stood out to me as one of my favorites, just because it's this world where they go to this house, and it's a house party, and they want to decorate the house for Halloween. So they put these satanic symbols on the floor all over the house, and what it does is it turns out to be a sort of incantation, and it converts the sort of house decorations into reality. Now, this is similar to the other episode they've had before, where someone cursed costumes and people became their ghost, their character. This is a little bit different. This was just a personal favorite. I think it's one of the first episodes we really get to familiar with Anya. I just adore it for that reason. I always loved the idea of the fear monster at the end, which sort of alluded to, I think, another point later on in the show. But for this one, I thought the perfect recommendation would be The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. Obviously, it's not a one-to-one recommendation, but I think there are similar themes here where you have this house where things start to get twisted and you don't understand what's happening, and the house itself is almost alive, and that is essentially what's happening in the show. And of course, one of my favorite books of all time. This is by Shirley Jackson. She is one of the founders of horror, in my opinion. It is about a group of people who go to this house to investigate it, who they think it's haunted. While there, our main character starts to go mad, thinking she's experiencing things or confused by what's going on. And what this book is known for is its ability to create atmosphere, ability to really terrify, because the horrors are never explicitly shown. It's unclear whether or not it's actually real versus in your mind. We really don't know, and that's what makes it all the more terrifying. So I also want to give another recommendation for this, which is going to be It by Stephen King. This isn't about a house, but it is about fear. It's about fear, or people's fears, coming alive. Naturally, I think it fits here just because that's what's happening in the show, this episode. Basically, their fears are becoming manifest. And I'm not going to go any more into this because I feel like most people have heard about it. I've also mentioned it in another book recommendation video. The next episode I want to mention is The Prom, Season 3, Episode 20. This is another episode that I feel like isn't traditionally in the top 10 episodes of all time, but it's a personal favorite of mine, because what happens is we have Buffy wanting to go to her prom, wanting to just be normal and fit in as she is prone to want to do. And of course, it is ruined by some sort of demon attack. I honestly don't remember the details here. But when she finally is able to go, she is surprised when the student body is found to have come together to reward her as protector of the high school, basically recognizing her as the savior, this person who sacrifices everything to keep them safe. And it is such a beautiful story. It makes me feel so happy inside, so giddy when I think of that. It's such a good episode. Now, the recommendation I'm going to be giving isn't quite in line as far as themes goes, because this one's going to be Carrie by Stephen King. And if you don't know, this is about a girl who has telekinetic powers, and she is getting bullied by her school, and eventually she gets revenge. Now, the ending of the story is a little bit different, but it's a similar, at least in the starting points, in the sense that we have this girl who feels ostracized, and she feels like she's not getting acknowledged or respected by her fellow students. And in the end, she gets back. It's a similar setup in that way, even if it's not the same thing. Admittedly, I had trouble finding a good book that really fit well here. This is the best one I could think of. and I don't have a second one to go along with it. And my next favorite is going to be number 7, Chosen, season 7, episode 22. Then this episode, this is the penultimate, or like the final 2-hour episode, if you consider both of them, which I do, where the show is about to end. And it's essentially about trying to defeat the first evil. So the whole idea of what happens in this episode is they defy the entire premise of the show, this idea that Buffy is the chosen one. In every generation, there is a chosen one.
Into every generation, a Slayer is born. One girl in all the world. She alone will have the strength and skill to... There's that word again. What you are, how you'll die. Alone.
So that's the whole premise here, that she is alone and she cannot fight with others. But by this point in the show, we recognize that she has a Scooby Gang, and she also realizes that she doesn't have to fight alone. She is stronger with more people. And so they use that to defy this idea of the chosen one and to empower every woman, who could be a potential Slayer, with her powers of Slayerhood. Because at this point in the show, we've realized that every time a Slayer dies, a new one is born. But what they're doing is that they're taking all these potential Slayers who would form if one other died, and giving them all the power of the Slayership, and really just defying the patriarchy and defying the idea of being forced to be the only one to do this. It is so beautiful. It's fantastic. The first one I want to mention here is Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows by J.K. Rowling, just because, of course, he is the chosen one. They do not as overtly defy the notion of the chosen one in here, but obviously he is the chosen one. And what we learned in this book and in the last few books is that his being the chosen one isn't special, it is arbitrary. And in fact, he will lose if he doesn't work with his friends. I think that's a big overarching theme of this book, that he has to stay strong with people that he cares and loves. And that's really like Voldemort's biggest weakness, right? That he has no one to love and no one loves him. A slightly different take on the same episode would be The Power by Naomi Alderman. And this is a book I haven't read. I should also add, I have not read Carrie. I forgot to mention that. Of course, I've seen the movie, both movies. But in this book, it seems to be this matriarchy where these women get the powers to do anything. And while I don't know the overarching plot of this book because I haven't read it yet, I do know it is basically about destroying the patriarchy and women being empowered, and that sort of aligns with this idea of every potential Slayer getting the power of Slayerhood. Chosen was my number 8, not my number 7. Now, this is my number 7, The Wish, season 3, episode 9. And this is the first episode we ever meet Anya, the vengeance demon who grants Cordelia's wish that Buffy had never come to Sunnydale.
I wish Buffy Summers had never come to Sunnydale.
Done.
And in doing so, she creates this alternate reality where everything is dark and demonic and life is not good. She was wrong not to want Buffy, and it ends up being her own downfall. And they only just barely are able to save the universe by taking down Anya. And I love this episode. It's one of my favorites. Obviously, it's on this list because it's one, we find Anya, and 2, it's just another multiverse idea. And naturally, if I'm going to talk about multiverses, I have to mention Blake Crouch's Dark Matter here. And this book, which I've been a few years since I've read, this man's family goes missing, or he goes missing from his family, and in the search to find them, he finds he's in a much more complicated situation than he realized. And I've already mentioned multiverse, so that really alludes to the basic idea of what this story is about. It is fantastic and so much fun. The next one is going to be number 6 is Becoming, season 2, episode 21. And in this episode, Buffy is in a position to where she has to kill Angel, or Angelus, as he has now lost his soul. And if she doesn't do it on time, Angel will, or Angelus will, basically open this portal to this demonic world. All these demons will be able to break free into Earth, and the apocalypse will happen, and the end of the world will occur. Moments before the episode ends, she fails, and Angel, or Angelus, is able to open the portal to this alternate dimension, this demon hell. Moments later after that happens, right before Buffy has to kill Angelus, Willow succeeds in rejuvenating him with his soul. Basically, he gets his soul back and goes from being Angelus to Angel. If you're not familiar with this, Angel is a vampire who has a soul, so he does good things because he has a conscience. And then he loses it, and then of course he gets it back. And in that moment, Buffy recognizes that the only way to stop the apocalypse, to close the gate, is to kill Angel. But in this moment, Buffy has to make the most difficult sacrifice of her life because she loves Angel. I mean, she is part of the reason that Angel lost his soul in the first place. She now is in a position to have to kill him, not just because he's turned evil, but because it's the only way to save the universe, even though he is now good. And it's this impossible situation. She got what she wanted. He's good again. But there's only one thing to do, and that is kill him, sacrifice him to save the world. And she does it. She does it. She ignores her feelings and she saves the world because that's what she has to do. I could fucking cry right now. God, this is so sad. It's good though. It's good. And for this one, I have another set of 2 books. The first one I'm going to mention is probably something very few people have read. And that's going to be Blood Beast by Darren Shane. This is book 5 of the Demonotic series. This is a YA series about this world where there's a universe of demons in a sort of tangential universe. And this book isn't particularly special, objectively speaking, but it is special to me. It was my favorite series as a child. I read Darren Shane's Cirque du Freak vampire series, which I think is more popular because it got made into a movie with John C. Reilly. This one I loved more just because I love magic and there's also demons. And in this book, what happens is we have a similar situation where things are progressing. A sacrifice has to be made to save the world. And while it isn't a love story, it is a different type of love. It is almost just as heart-wrenching. The next one I want to mention here is something I just have to talk about because I just recently reread it and I love it. It's going to be Middle Game by Shauna McGuire. And this is, I think, a more abstract take. This isn't a love story per se. It is about this world where essentially an apocalypse will happen, where something catastrophic is going to happen unless certain characters make sacrifices, the necessary sacrifices to make it not happen. And there are different types of sacrifices, and also the relationship here is a sibling relationship. It's not a lover's relationship, but there is still there's a question of sacrifice and losing people you love or putting people you love at risk. For me, it is heart-wrenching and it is fantastic and it is spectacular. My favorite book that I've read this year, even though it was a reread. Number 5, Season 2, Episode 17. This is just a few episodes preceding season finale. This is an episode where we have this character, Jenny, who was a part of the Scooby Gang and now has been ostracized because they found out she wasn't who she said she was. It turns out she was there monitoring Angel, who might turn into Angelus. Well, the problem is, though, is that even though she wasn't there honestly, the premise of why she's there was a lie, she did come to care for the Scooby Gang, and particularly for Giles. She's some of this group of Romanians who were the ones who originally cursed Angelus with his soul, and that was sort of her goal, was to make sure he didn't lose it, right? And then he did, and now he's ostracized because they found out that she wasn't who she said she was. And so she tries to use this Romanian mythology to bring back his soul. But moments before she can, even though she comes so close, Angelus finds her, kills her, and then sets up her body for Giles to find, just when Giles was feeling like maybe he can give her a chance. It is heartbreaking and terrifying and really just so dark, so goddamn dark, but so good. And it really just highlights how evil Angelus is, because it's just purely for the sake of pain. And for this one, I think I'm going with more with theme and ambiance or atmosphere with this suggestion, which is going to be The Ballad of Black Tom by Victor Laval. And this is a novella about this black man living in New York during the 1920s, I think, or that sort of same time period. And he does a bunch of odd jobs. When he eventually gets to do this one job, which involves something Lovecraftian and something that could destroy the world. I won't say exactly what happens. There's a good deal of tragedy in here, characters taking very dark paths and doing very dark things for very dark reasons. It is not, I mean, there were a lot of ways you could say this is not the same as this episode, but I do think it is similar in a lot of ways, and some basic overarching themes that exist here, even if the intent is necessarily different. Okay, number 4, Nightmares, Season 1, Episode 10. And now I love this episode of Buffy because it is an episode where this little boy is in a coma, and his dreams start to leach out into the real world. Essentially what is happening here is everyone's nightmares become reality. What that does is it creates a world that loses all sense of rationality and meaning and darkness ensues. And for this one, I felt like there's so much potential here, and I feel like there's got to be another story for this, but I struggled to find a book, a full-length book that really applied to this. I'd love to hear your recommendations if you have any ideas. But I'm going to be recommending a set of short stories called I Never Meant to Start a Murder Cult and Other Stories by Daryl Grizzle. And there's one story in here in particular which sort of meshes with this idea, or deals with this idea of dreams in the real world and sort of the two overlapping, one sort of bleeding over into the other. And I feel like there's got to be more recommendations for this one. I'd love to hear your ideas on other stories that could fit to this, particularly because if I haven't read them, I kind of want to, because I love this sort of blending of reality and dream. I mean, obviously, I could talk about Nightmare on Elm Street, but that's not a book now, is it? That's what I should do. I should find books like Nightmare on Elm Street and read those. Okay, down to the final three, and this isn't easy here, okay? This is a very difficult thing to choose, but ultimately it's all about emotion for me, and that's when they have to be what they are. And so number 3 is going to be The Gift, Season 5, Episode 22. And if you're not familiar with Buffy, this is the final episode of Season 5, which at the time was thought to potentially be a series finale, and because of that it really packs a punch. And we have a similar situation here. We have an apocalypse that has been opened up by this goddess Glory, and it turns out that Buffy's sister Dawn is the key to opening it and closing it. It is her blood. She isn't even real. I mean, she is real now, but it's only because these monks altered reality to bring her into existence, to personify, literally personify the key to this demon world, this demon multiverse, or you know what I mean. Kind of like season 2. Ultimately, what Buffy decides to do here is truly the biggest sacrifice she can do. She sacrifices herself. She realizes that as Dawn's sister, even if that sisterhood was manufactured, they now share the same blood, and her blood and Dawn's blood are both the key. So just as Dawn's blood can end this apocalypse, her blood can do the same. And in that, she kills herself. She uses herself, her body, her blood, her life to save Dawn and save the world yet again. And in the moments before she kills herself, she says, and I may get this wrong here, I made a sense of the clip, hardest thing about being in this world is living in it.
Dawn, the hardest thing in this world is to live in it. Be brave. Live. For me.
So touching, it's so good. All of our characters are just so perfect in this. I wonder if you could guess what recommendation will be for this. I mean, I feel like it's an obvious one, a very popular book, a very similar circumstance, Cabin at the End of the World by Paul Tremblay. Now, this is a story about this cult-ish of things coming to this house, this cabin in the woods, this family, this 2 husbands and their daughter, and telling them they have to sacrifice someone. They have to be the ones to do it, otherwise the world will end. And this book is the epitome of mindfuckery. It is a cult that is somewhat compelling, and you don't quite know what is real and what is just insanity. It's a similar situation where, is the apocalypse real? If so, does this person actually have to be sacrificed? Obviously, it's a different story, but it's a similar theme, a similar basic premise, which I think just works fantastically. And there's themes of loss and survival, and so good, so good. Okay, number 2. Now, there are 2 big episodes here that I haven't mentioned, and if you know Buffy, I think you understand why. So the question here is, which one's going to be number 1? I bet you're wondering. And this might just tell you, because the number 2 is going to be Once More with Feeling. Season 6, Episode 7. And in this episode, someone summons a dancing demon. No, something isn't right there. It's getting eerie. What's this cheery singing all about?
It's getting eerie. What's this cheery singing all about?
And dear God, my sisters probably, I mean, they definitely hate me for this. They probably know the songs just as well as I do, because I used to play them all the time, and I still do occasionally. Oh God, it's so good. And so they literally summon a dancing demon, and the demon kills you by making you do a dance number until you die, basically self-combust. And in this season, this is season 6, so this is after Buffy has killed herself, and a big theme of this is the fact that they had to bring her back from the dead. And with that comes a number of problems, because Buffy was in heaven. They pulled her out of heaven.
There was no pain, no fear, no doubt, till they pulled me out.
they pull her out of heaven. And so she's trying to live in this world with its knowledge of heaven, knowing that she was in heaven. And naturally, when you go from heaven to earth, earth is going to be a hell. And how do you survive in it? And there's that. And there's also just so many other fantastic character arcs that are just being highlighted by this musical number, because as many problems as there are with Joss Whedon, this episode is fantastic. His writing is so fantastic, so clever. I could just go all day about this episode. I don't have a book where characters break out in a song, and I don't know if that's a thing. Like, musicals are one thing for like television and movies, but I imagine they're harder to do a book. If you have any recommendations for this, I would like to know. But the ones that I chose to go with are twofold. The first one I think was actually a decent recommendation, and that's going to be The Devil in the Deep, a series, an anthology of horror stories of the sea, edited by Ellen Datlow. And if you are at all familiar with the sea or the ocean, Cthulhu is a big one, right? There's also sirens, is that right? I'm pretty sure sirens are from the ocean. And so there are a bunch of different stories in here, which are astonishingly unique. Some of them were a little too abstract for me, but some of them were fantastic. This was actually my first time being introduced to people like Stephen Graham Jones, Shauna McGuire, and so many more. I think Alyssa Wong isn't someone I've heard talk about a lot, but she has one in here that I absolutely adored. It's not all around music, but something about the sea, there is a call to it, right? It is almost like a musical allure, right? And that is definitely present here. And the more I talk about it, the more I think to myself, this is actually a fantastic recommendation. There's there's at least one story in here which talks about, which is a Cthulhu story, and I thought it was fantastic. When I first started this, I didn't love it at first, but now thinking back to it, there were several good stories in here that really just made it worth reading. I may have given it 3.5 stars, possibly 4, but honestly, I think it is worth giving a shot to, just for the episodes that really shine, because there are some really unique, fantastic episodes, you know what I mean, chapters or stories. The next one I want to do isn't at all related to song, but it's more about a reality that's being warped or shifted, and that's going to be a comedy sci-fi story by John Scalzi. It's called Red Shirts, and this is a story that is basically a spoof on Star Trek, which, if you don't know anything about Star Trek, I mean, I'm sure you know something about it, but this idea that if these characters in the original show had red shirts, they were extras. They were going to die. They were there just to be killed. And realistically, if you had this advanced civilization, there would be a higher level of quality assurance to make sure that these kind of deaths, these kind of casual, stupid deaths don't happen. It's a story about this realistic future where this world happens. Then there was this one ship where, when people go on missions, they do things that are overtly absurd and dumb. And after it's over, people begin to think rationally. They're like, that guy was really dumb. And then people who do it, who are doing the actions, recognize in the moment how dumb they're being, but they literally can't help it. Almost like they're being forced to break out into song, which isn't at all what's happening here, but it's that basic idea of not having control of yourself. It is fantastic. It breaks the fourth wall. It is clever. It is hilarious. It's a really fun story. I think it fits really well here. And I don't think you need any knowledge of Star Trek, as long as you're familiar with the basic idea. I also think this might work for the Wishes episode, the one with dark matter, just because it's sort of a multiverse type idea. Okay, and finally, in the top episode ever of Buffy the Vampire Slayer is going to be Body, Season 5, Episode 16. In this episode, Buffy's mother has died from a brain aneurysm.
Mom? Mom? Mommy?
It is irreversible. She is dead, and there's no saving her. All that's left is the body. Hence the name, the title of the episode, being the body. And it's about loss and grief, and about Buffy, who is this hero with so many powers, so much strength, her ability to do so much. But then the natural world still sort of just stabs her in the gut. Something she can't prevent, something she can't stop, gets the better of her, and they have to deal with it. There's a really good scene with Anya trying to cope with this idea of death, because at this point she's been human for probably a year, and she still has centuries of being a demon, a vengeance demon, and trying to cope with this idea of loss and how she could just cease to be. And it's really, really beautiful. I'll probably just insert it here.
But I don't understand. I don't understand how this all happens. how we go through this. I mean, I knew her, and then there's just a body.
And I have a few suggestions for this one. The first one I'm going to be talking about is a book I haven't read again, and that's going to be Being Immortal by Atul Gawande. And this is a book about medicine and what matters in the end. So I think, from my understanding, it's a book that talks about death and loss. While I haven't read it, it seems like it'd be relevant here as we try and grapple with this idea of death and how we cope with it. The next book I want to recommend for this is going to be Mapping the Interior. It's a novella by Stephen Graham Jones. And this is a story about a young boy and his mother trying to cope with the death of the father, their dad, or his dad. While it's not necessarily following directly after the death, we still see him trying to cope with this idea of his father being gone. And it is a bit of a ghost story, so there's some stuff there. But I think this also deals with sort of death and trying to cope with that, of a death of a parent, in a horrific way. And then the last one I want to mention here is a book that I haven't read in several years. And honestly, I don't remember much of anything about it. So forgive me if I'm really off base here. But another book I think that deals with loss is going to be Everything I Never Told You by Celeste Ng. And in this book, this young girl dies, and the parents try to deal with it, try to understand what's going on. I think it's more about trying to figure out how it happened and why it happened. But I guess the reason I chose to put this here is because I know it deals with the loss of a daughter, of a loved one, and trying to cope with that. That concludes this recommendation video. I hope you enjoyed this. It's really fun just to think about books that reflect some of my favorite episodes of the show. And hopefully, maybe you get some books that you're interested in reading now. I appreciate you watching. Thank you so much. If you liked the video, be sure to like. And if you want to see more from me, be sure to subscribe, as many people like to say on here. And until next time, I hope you stay safe, and goodbye.